Welcome to another edition of Seven Book Club. For those who just join us for the first time, let me just tell you that Seven Book Club is a part of a larger project, operation, if you like, that it's happening across seven ecosystem. And it involves seven academies, seven foundation, and obviously seven photo agency. And what started really with the onset of an outbreak of the pandemic, and it started as what we used to call Seven Interactive, is now called Seven Insider. And I'm just sharing here our new website. And for those who don't know, the idea was to basically mitigate the effects of isolation that we are and lockdowns that we are still going through, and hopefully spark conversation, share quality information, and learn from each other. And now we launched a new website, which I urge everyone to have a look at. And as you can see, our calendar is very, very populated already, and there is much more to come. A lot of our events are free, or what we like to call freemium, which basically means you need to be a registered user. And we also offer a variety of paid content, which we call premium. So I urge you to sign up for whatever model suits you. And this time, as always, at Book Club, we talk books we like with people we respect. And this time with us is Ed Kashi and his, I would say, seminal body of work called Aging in America. And even though the book was published 17 years ago, I think the pandemic is making this book as relevant as it can be. But we're going to touch and we're going to talk about aging in America as well as aging in pandemic. So I would like to hand it over to Ed. But before that, for everyone, feel free to ask questions in the chat box, which is in the on the bottom of your Zoom screen. We are not streaming anymore on Facebook because we feel it's much better if we keep it on Zoom. And for all those who are registered, you will also get access to the recording. And without further ado, Ed, you're with us. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, Zia.
Hi. So,
Hey.
Ed, here we are 17 years later with a topic that never gets old. And but definitely the time we're living in is also makes this book, like I said, as relevant as ever. So I'll hand it over to you. I'll be with you all the time, obviously. I will jump in, spark the conversation, and everyone else feel free to ask questions that I will pass on Ed. So Ed, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. Zia, thank you so much. Let me share my screen, and yes, this topic never gets old. Only we get old. That's the way it seems to be. So, for me, I began thinking about this idea of looking at aging in America back in like 1994, 1995, after having worked many years abroad. And there was just something that hit me one time when I was working actually in Yalta in the Crimea, where I realized that for all the research and homework and observation I may do on a subject when I'm working outside of the United States, I realized how much I don't understand. And so that is partly what compelled me to sort of cast my eye at my own country and my own society and try to look at what would be one of the great themes of my lifetime. So for me, the motivation and the genesis of this project which spanned from about 1995 to 2003, was really wanting to create a sort of timeless body of work, in the grand tradition of documentary photography. And so let me just get this going here. And so I worked with my wife, Julie Winokur, on this project. And also in the course of doing this project, we transitioned from being print-based journalists, she's a writer, I'm a photographer, to filmmakers and multimedia artists. So that was an interesting evolution that also happened in terms of the the approach we take in our work and the methods that we use to tell our stories. And as Zia rightly points out, while the purpose, or let's just say the motivation for this project was this one sort of demographic fact that in the course of our lifetime, for the first time in the history of humanity, there would be more people over the age of 60 or 55, whatever age you want to use the cutoff, as opposed to those under 18. And that for most of the industrialized world, and in fact for really most of the world, we're living longer. And what are we going to do with that gift of longevity? And so that was really the one of the central themes of that, what pushed us to look at this topic. And the way we approached it was really trying to take a broad, I would say, a topographical look at, what does America look like as it grows old? Because this is not just about America. This is really about, all of humanity. And while certain countries and cultures may look different and might manifest and deal with their aging societies, populations differently, in the end, it's pretty universal. And I would say we were talking earlier about this, one of the universal kind of qualities or that I think is so important to apply to our elders is similar to what we would apply to our babies and our children, which is to keep them secure, comfortable, and to have dignity, particularly dignity as you grow older. And so now, in this moment of the pandemic, where it's very clear that the majority of people who are not only getting sick, but really who are dying are our elders. And this is all over the globe. This is not just an American thing or a European thing. That it draws into sharp relief the importance of paying attention to our elder population. And, as I like to say, I believe most of us want to grow old and hopefully have a long, healthy, good life. And so, you might look at the idea of growing old or aging quite differently when you're in your 20s or 30s. But the reality is that this is something we all hopefully will face. And what I wanted this book and this project to serve as is a kind of almost like a shot across the bow to our societies, to say, wake up and pay attention to what is coming down the pike. That we will have an inordinately large part of our population will be older. And while some of them will skydive and mountain climb and be in the Olympics and do all these wonderful things, for millions of folks, it's going to mean, scenes like this where you're, hopefully dying around your family. This is in West Virginia. So this project was trying to look at sort of the vibrant and the active. These are ballroom dancers in Florida, to generally, certainly in the United States, one of the most engaged portions of our population politically are our elders. This was at the Democratic Convention in 2000. And then looking at the retirement communities, and we photographed the Senior Olympics. This was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And, I found this to be in some ways very inspiring, to see our elders being so active and engaged and vibrant. And it sort of taught me a lot. I was in my 40s when I worked on this. It in a way, and so much of the work we do serves this, that for whatever stories we create, whatever impact or value our stories may have to our societies, we gain so much through the personal experiences that we have in doing this work. And for me, it really taught me, that I want to live a healthy life. I want to have a long life. And, these are some of the do's and the don'ts.
So Ed, you mentioned earlier, and I just want to touch base on that. So we are living in this human population. I mean, humans have never had a longer life expectancy, and this goes, both for Nigeria as well as, more developed countries like US. So healthcare is much better. The quality of life, let's say, is better. And you mentioned this longevity at the beginning of your talk as some sort of gift or a bliss. So I'm just thinking, is this longevity also becoming a little bit of a curse? Or are
Absolutely.
or are we making it a curse?
Well, I think it depends how you look at it, but it also depends on your state, your health, your physical and mental, psychological health. If, as I say, for all the millions of people who will climb mountains into their 80s and 90s, there's going to be millions of people who are suffering from depression and loneliness and chronic diseases so it's a mixed bag, this longevity thing, right? It's definitely a mixed bag, and I think one of the greatest needs that this project highlighted for me, and now the pandemic like redoubles that, is the greater need for caring for each other. That we are not equipped, even in the United States, the richest country in the world, all that crap. The reality is that we're not equipped, we're not ready to care for the tens of millions of people who are going to live longer and need some level of care. And it's compounded also certainly in the United States and in many Western societies because of this sort of individualism that certainly capitalism breeds, and this idea of going it alone, and that sounds great on paper, but when you start to get older and you need help, it is not so great if you don't have that kind of support around you and that kind of love.
So you
And
think
again, the pandemic exacerbates and highlights that.
So you think that is this treatment of people who are older, is that something, and I think you touched a nerve there, can we blame it on this word society, which is sort of faceless word, or it's more related, as you said, as you mentioned, to economics, to liberal capitalism, or we are talking about upbringing and how we were taught. I assume my parents taught me and your parents taught you to sort of take care, as you say, of elderly as much as we take care of our kids. So I'm just curious, is it like, can we pinpoint the reason, why elderly people or older people, I think that's a better word, are being, let's say, discarded or, regarded as useless members of this society, which is a horrible thing to say. But
Yeah.
So can we blame it on, like, is it capitalism? Or is it our upbringing, or it's just a nature? So I'm just curious, like, through
Yeah.
when while you're working on this, could you sort of pinpoint, see what's the reason for that treatment?
Well, yeah, no, and it's a central question actually, and I do believe it's in large part because of capitalism and kind of the mentality that it breeds and the sort of economic structures that it creates, and in and of itself, capitalism it's not doing it purposefully, that's not but it's sort of it's like an effect that maybe wasn't expected. So the example that I give when I saw this with my own eyes was in the 1950s. This entrepreneur Del Webb, he decided to create these retirement communities in the southwestern states, Southern California, Arizona, places where it was warm all the time. It was quite beautiful, and on the surface of it, what's wrong with selling the idea that, hey, you've worked your whole life, you're retiring, now go move out west and have this beautiful quality of life, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But what does that actually do? It tears apart the fabric of families and communities, because that means now that if you grow up on the East Coast and all of a sudden you start to have kids and then your parents move to Arizona, that means your kids don't have grandparents around, and you don't have your parents around to help you raise your kids. And these are things that this is not human nature, this change. I really do believe it's driven by economics mainly, and politics, and particularly the brand of capitalism that has fostered itself in the United States, in America, which is very like Darwinian, and this idea that the market solves everything. That's not true. The market can solve many things, but it also creates problems that didn't previously exist. So when I go to other nations, other cultures and societies, you don't see this happening. The elders grow old in place. They grow old in wherever they live, or they're moved in to the homes of their kids, and that's just kind of normal. Or even just a community will take care of its elders in a more collective way. And now that those things still exist in the United States. I don't want to paint a picture that all those traditions, or whatever you want to call it, like cultural ways, have disappeared in the United States. But in general, I believe the brand of capitalism that is practiced here in America created some of these issues. But here's the brilliant thing about capitalism, and I'm not like extolling it, but I'm just laying out what I see as the facts. What it also enables us to do is recreate. And so I'm like, whether it's, so this image is from a bikers club called Retreads, right? So, while our elders may be kicked out of the nest or discarded, they're banding together and creating motorcycle clubs, or the senior pro rodeo tour. Where what America has a great ability to do is sort of tear down or destroy traditions, but then recreate new ones in their place. It's not always good, but often it is good, and it sort of moves us forward, and that's kind of what I see. So it's a mixed bag, if you like.
It always is. It's never black and white. But I think the pandemic really made clear what you just said, and we can see that from numbers of people who have died. Those communities of or retirement homes and so on have been decimated everywhere in Europe or in America. So I think that really sums it up. Putting together a lot of older people makes it perfect, breeding grounds for such a terrible disease to basically massacre those people. And I have to say, me coming from Bosnia, we don't have much of this culture like in the States, or for that matter in Western Europe, of elderly homes and so on and so forth. Usually, and that's also, I have to admittedly, it's changing and we are going in the same direction. People here usually get old within, not necessarily in the same house or household with their kids and so on, but they grow old close to the families. So, elderly homes are not big business here at all. So for that matter, when now with the pandemic, when you look at the people, numbers and people who have died, actually, the older population was not that, wasn't that much decimated. Like, for example, in Sweden, where where the COVID just swept through the elderly homes. So I think it's really, basically, it just exactly confirms what you just said. And I find it a little bit bizarre to sort of, I understand the mechanics of it and why people, create these, like retirement settlements, call it that way, or homes. But I find it also horrible to basically, as you said, tear the fabric of society. How can you visit your grandparents if they are, in America, easily 2,000 miles away? In America, that's, easy. I find it horrible.
Yeah, well, and Zia, get this. Additionally, there are some retirement communities that have curfews on children. Like, there's some communities where, by 6 p.m., like everyone under the age of 18 must be out. Can you believe that? Like, what kind of life? I can't imagine growing older if I have the privilege to grow old into my 80s or whatever, and not wanting to hear the sounds of children.
It's crazy.
So it's a crazy mentality. And the other, I also want to one thing I want to talk about also in terms of reinvention, just these two images. This is an example of what examples where on the left, this is in Portland, and the police department realized that they needed more officers on the beat, so they created this like program where retired police officers could come back to work. Or on the right, this is in Ohio at a Bon Bell factory that had it was the first manufacturing line in the country that had an all elderly population manning that line. And what I think is so sweet about that is Bon Bell makes cosmetics for children, for teenagers. So these are ways, or this guy in Virginia who's a crane operator, that there are ways that, and that's another very important element to be reminded about, is that many people who are growing old now throughout the world, they don't want to stop working, because work isn't just about making money. Work is about our identity. And you and I know that so well because of what we do, that, while we want to get paid for what we do, obviously, but we do it because it is who we are, and we're storytellers, we're journalists. We want to go out in the world and see and observe things. So I find that to be a very encouraging aspect of how we're responding in some ways. Again, as we said, it's a mixed bag, where now we're creating more fertile ground for older workers to remain relevant and to remain engaged, and most importantly, to be productive members of society.
Because we are, being sold this myth that once you hit a certain age, you're simply not productive. Certainly, of course,
Yeah.
your production will go down a little bit with the levels of your energy, but that's so highly individual that I don't think, it can be generalized. Yet it seems to be completely generalized and accepted idea that once you hit this whatever mark it is, you're just not as productive as you are. So I mean,
Right.
obviously we're touching base of ageism, and I know in the age of racism, of sexism, it may sound that it's not time to talk about ageism, but I think with this book it's definitely right place and time to talk about it. So I'm just curious, how do you see that ageism, in whatever form, shape it happens in what we do? I mean, I'm just curious about that, in what we do as photographers.
Yeah, no, I as we were talking about earlier, I absolutely, I feel it. I feel the kind of ageism in this profession, but I understand. I understand that it's hard not to take certain things personally, but in this case, this should not be taken personally. It's just the way, again, it's the way our culture and our society operates, that editors and curators and art directors, they want the sort of young, sexy, I use that term, not like interesting, attractive, vibrant people. That's what they're sort of attracted to, right? It's just natural, it's human nature. And so what happens is, folks who are older, while they may be respected and all that, they're often neglected as well. And but as you rightly point out, we have you know hundreds and really thousands of years of discrimination against women and against people of color, and those need to be rectified. Most immediately, those need to be rectified. But I would just urge people to remember that you know it's important not to discriminate against older folks.
Absolutely.
You know.
I'm just going to read something that it's going back to the what you mentioned about elderly homes and settlements for older people. So Ted Ostrovsky, he's just writing us now. He says, here in Canada, for the profit long-term care homes have been exposed in this pandemic as a disgraceful model of greed and neglect. Even the non-for-profit homes are little more than warehouses of the unwanted and unseen. I mean, I would, Ted,
That's
if you're still with us, please elaborate a little bit more on that if you can. But it's a horrible thing to hear. And yes, from the news we've seen that. I keep mentioning Sweden because like the vast percentage of people who died were people who were in elderly homes and so on and so forth. And for that matter, most probably virus was brought in by someone who's young and who's working there. And
right.
anyway,
Oh,
and
and it's possible that the person that worker who was younger was also a person, person of color, a minority, who was thrust into a position during the pandemic where they had to go to work to support their families, but they didn't have the protections that they needed to work safely.
yeah, absolutely. Anyway, here's sorry, just to give you a break. Here's a question from Rick Ernst, who's asking, how many years did you work on this project prior to publishing the book? And are you still working on this, taking images devoted to documenting all the people in America? And do you still produce work around this team?
So we did about 7 years of field work to produce this book, and then we also produced a documentary of the same name, a 1-hour documentary, and website and all that stuff, which all was published roughly in 2003. We went to 25 of the 50 states to produce this work. And then what happened was a year or two after we finished this project, then we received a commission to do work. Well, actually, it's way more personal than that, because actually this project compelled us to move from San Francisco to New Jersey to take care of my wife's father, who at that point was 82 years old and was starting to show signs of dementia and Parkinson's disease. And we realized he couldn't live alone anymore. And so, you know, as I often say, this is a case where being a journalist made me a better human being, because what I saw out there, like all the hordes of warehoused elders who were left in their soiled diapers for hours, or left to have bed sores because they just weren't cared for. It compelled us to, you know, make sure we would not do that to our one surviving parent. And so then this project continued. It gave it even new life after the book and the film were done, the initial huge body of work. Then we actually moved our lives across the country to take care of Herbie, our one surviving parent. And and then after that, you know, and up to this moment, I will say one thing that's quite interesting. I don't think I've ever received a magazine assignment on the subject of aging, which I find absolutely bizarre, but that's a whole nother topic.
And at the same time, you elect the oldest president ever.
Right, which I think it might be that in this moment we need a decent grandfather to come and sort things out for us. You know, that's maybe what we need. Who would have ever thought, but maybe that's what we need, you know. And in a sense, Joe Biden's win and all that it represents, I think it's so beautiful. There's something poetic about he's winning, but then Kamala Harris is his vice president, this young, vibrant, smart, powerful woman. So it's sort of in a way maybe the best of these worlds, right? Where we have an experienced elderly person, but then in the wings is the next generation waiting to bust out and move us forward. That was a little bit of a digression, but anyway.
Paul Marotta, who's been with us through every single of
yes,
episodes, he's asking.
Hello, Paul.
He's saying he's been I have been long inspired by this specific work, and it also represents amazing amount and kind of access. So how did you find the communities and gain access?
Yeah. So that's a great question. You know, it was interesting because this was at the beginning of the, in some ways, the beginning of like the internet and search engines and all. And I'll never forget in the early mid 90s where, you know, you would type, it doesn't even exist anymore, the search engine we used, but you type in, you know, aging in America, and you'd have all these articles come up. And I know this seems banal now, but I cannot tell you back then how revolutionary it was, that we didn't need to go to the library and work with microfiche and do photocopies with a sack full of coins. We could literally, wherever we were, access all this information. And so through doing, you know, basic journalistic work, research reporting, Julie and I would constantly be finding articles and stories on aging. And then from there, either pursue those specific leads, or it would conjure up ideas. So for instance, this set of pictures here, I just go back from Pine Ridge, South Dakota, which is the where the Lakota Sioux Native Americans are that's their homeland. It's also one of the poorest places in America. We wanted to go to a Native American community to look at the issue of grandparents raising kids. At that point, this was in, I think, 1999, there were over 4 million children in America being raised by their grandparents. So, you know, we said, okay, we're going to go to Pine Ridge and we're going to look at that. Now you talk about access. So I get there, and what do we find out is that this is a huge, expansive community, you know, humongous in South Dakota territory. And they're not surprisingly not very keen on outsiders with cameras coming to ask questions and to photograph. So I had to think of, well, how can I gain access to the elders in this community and, you know, respect not only them, but respect the needs, the desires, the concerns, the paranoia of the community. And so I found out that there was a Meals on Wheels, this guy, and I love his name, Oscar, jealous of him. That was his name, Oscar, jealous of him. And he would go around every day delivering meals to the homebound elderly on the reservation in the community. So I fortunately got him to agree to allow me to accompany him. So then I thought, well, this way we'll show up at these, very remote homes and with an elderly person. And then I could ask them face to face, with Oscar's support, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. Is it okay? I would say half the people said like no, but enough folks said yes and welcomed me in. So then I could photograph and start to create like relationships with them so then I could return on my own. Well, one of the people was this woman, don't remember her name now, but who, when we returned to her home, we found her in this state. And the day before, her Social Security check, which comes every month, had arrived. And her son came, cashed it, held a big party. All him and his friends got drunk, and they left. He left his mother like this on the floor. This is the next morning. And so, and Julie was with me, and we actually had our 6-month-old son with us at this time, and we were just so upset by this. We then called. This is a case where also, you wear different hats in doing this work. We became, not to say I'm a social worker by any means, but that, I sort of started to I wore that hat where it's like, this is not okay what we're seeing here. And it's not just about photographing it. It's like, how do we hopefully remedy the situation and find some care for this woman who was left like this? And so we called 911 and emergency, and the EMT folks came and took her away and put her in a nursing home. So this is a case where we actually intervened in a situation. I know that's a lot more than Paul that you asked, but that's part of gaining access. What comes with gaining access is responsibility to the people who have granted it to us. It's not just like, I agreed to open the door to my house so you can come in and steal everything. He said, I agreed to open the door so you can come to my house, and then we're going to have a conversation, and you're going to learn, you're going to ask me questions and learn about me, and we take it from there. That it has to be a give and take. So, and then if I may, this is another small story, but I feel is so valuable and is an example of also what we were doing back then was a lot of frontline reporting on this issue, that we were telling stories that hadn't been told yet at all or to a larger audience. So when we were living in San Francisco, every Wednesday is eviction day. Now, under the pandemic, I don't know about other countries, but certainly in the United States, we're facing a huge eviction problem because of the pandemic. And I don't know, Zia, do you know in other countries, is this an issue? Or anyone who's out there?
Well, as far as I know, US are pretty, most brutal when it comes to that, but yeah. I'm sure it happens in other countries as well.
Yeah. So, okay. So, and I'll, try to make this short, but this is an example of the innovations that take place. So, the sheriff of San Francisco realized that on Wednesday eviction day, there was an increasing number of properties where the sheriff would show up to basically secure the space and put a new lock on the door, right? That there were elderly people. And what was happening to them? They were literally being put out on the street. So this is an 82-year-old Lebanese man. He doesn't speak English. He didn't know that his son hadn't paid rent for a year. So Wednesday shows up and the marshals come to evict him. But now, so the program they created was where they would bring a social worker with the marshals when they knew that there was an elder person in that property. So the woman in the back is a social worker. So she immediately gets to work calling hospitals, halfway houses, shelters, so that this man would literally not be left bewildered on the sidewalk. And that's the kind of innovation that I feel, gives one some hope that while, there's lots of problems that capitalism and this sort of society has created, there are also solutions and sort of reinvention, if you like. We talk about in other cultures, generally people, quote unquote, age in place. This is so American. So, we have to like, quote unquote, age in place, which for most societies is just normal, right? Like, why would you kick out an elder from where they presumably grew up and, had their lives in? So the VA, the Veterans Administration, came up with this innovative program called primary-based home care, where they would work with VA nurses and family members or community members to take care of elderly individuals so they could remain in their homes. So simple. And again, I take this as, these structural innovations, while I don't know, they may seem like weird that we even have to do it. The reality is that at least we are addressing some of these issues.
And Ted Ostrowski, he's just writing. He's writing. It's more of a message rather than a question. But basically, he says, and it concerns pandemic. So I just thought I should read it out while we still have time. Sorry, Ed. So it says, my dad, Ted Ostrowski. My dad is in this home, and he posted the link, and the home denies us access due to pandemic. So my father is isolated and abandoned, feels abandoned at 90 years of age, and he's left unattended with bed sores, isolation, and no stimulation. I've heard this from various people, actually, Ted, where their parents or grandparents are in care homes and have been completely denied any access of during the pandemic. So from one perspective, I kind of understand that they don't want to let the disease come into the in those homes, but at the same time, if that coincides with the lack of attention and care, that's a horrible situation. I mean, it's so
yeah. Well, look, these nursing homes are, even the best ones, which are incredibly expensive. I mean, they can be like $10,000 to $15,000 a month. Like, who can afford that? And so what ends up happening is, if you're not wealthy, well, if you're wealthy, it's a way that it drains your wealth. And if you're poor, then Medicare, I think it's Medicare, Medicaid pays for it, but it means that you're basically in horrible facilities. But all these facilities are they're profit driven. And again, this is another fundamental issue that I have, frankly, with hyper-capitalist societies, that there are functions of society, of a civilized society, that should not be motivated by profit. They should be motivated by the greatest good for the most people. And what that does is, it actually, I believe, fosters even more wealth. I mean, besides the fact that it's a better way to be, I believe that it fosters more wealth and more, good feelings and productivity and harmony, instead of creating this Darwinian situation where everybody is out for themselves and there's not the support that's needed. So anyway, yeah, I didn't mean to make this into like a slam on capitalism, but again, it's a mixed bag.
I think what capitalism, I mean, what pandemic showed us is all the flaws that we may have not been aware of about capitalism. So I think it's a best, it's a great time to slam it. It deserves it.
Yeah. And there's a better way. And I feel like a lot of Western Europe and Scandinavia shows us that. Now, granted, they're generally smaller countries, somewhat more homogeneous, but certainly in Scandinavia. But I mean, they've shown a better way in my eyes, which is this kind of middle ground between, forget the terms, capitalism, socialism, but where, you still have profit and you have entrepreneurialism and all those things that drive us forward, but that there's a basic level of like safety net for society. Because look, healthcare is one of the greatest examples of that. In the United States, we waste so much money because we wait until people get sick. It's gotten a bit better, this idea of preventive healthcare, but we're nowhere near where we should be. So,
and while you can you hold on that picture, Isam Larkat. I'm sorry if I apologize if I'm not pronouncing well. He's well, you answer part of the question, but you already answered part of the question. But he's asking what shaped the aesthetic side of the project.
The aesthetic side. Well, so this was actually the last personal project I did on film, shooting with Leicas and all that. Not to get too nerdy here, but just, this was a case where there was no digital work done. So therefore, the aesthetics were very much kind of influenced by that approach, where I'm not making a huge number of frames. Things are more deliberate, slower paced, working in black and white, with intention, and trying to capture, for me as a visual storyteller, it's always about getting myself in the situation that will render the visual elements I want to put together to tell a story. All right. That it's not just about making beautiful photographs or cool photographs or weird photographs. It's really about making powerful images that tell a story. And that's often a very difficult, aesthetically, it's a very difficult challenge, because we're thrust into situations that we don't have control over. The backgrounds aren't necessarily great, the light's not necessarily great. We can't control what the people are doing. But that to me is the beautiful challenge of doing this work, is to figure out, how do we get access with dignity and respect, and then how do we understand what we're looking at, and then capture the moments in real time, so that we will tell a story that has impact, that touches people. That's, for me, the biggest factor. It's what I've called candid intimacy. I coined that term years ago, candid intimacy, where when a viewer says to me, wow, it's amazing how intimate that picture is, and it feels like you're not there, that to me is the greatest kind of comment that I can receive about my work, because it's not about me. So this image of Warren and Arden, this was maybe one of the most touching stories we found in the course of the whole project. This is in West Virginia, and we wanted to do a story about hospice care in rural America. So how are the elders who are close to death, how are they being cared for at the end of their lives in a rural situation? And so we found this one family, Arden and Maxine. This is Maxine. This is the moment she passes. And yeah, in many ways, this was the most powerful story that we were fortunate enough to, be given access to. And it's just, I know some people might look at this image and think it's depressing or sad, but I look at it and I think it's beautiful. That what more can you ask for, to be surrounded by your husband of 70 years, if they were married 70 years, and then your kids and your caregivers.
Can you please go back to this picture, because this is one of my favorite pictures, not of yours, but in general, and I think it's like contemporary Pietà and so on. Can you guide us a little bit through this picture? Like, I mean, it was obvious. It was obvious that she is going away, and I'm sure even day before they knew that she's getting close to her final moments. I'm just curious. How does that work out? I mean, I can imagine, but I'm sure people would like to hear that from you. Like, I mean, how do you ask someone, because I assume you asked, obviously, someone to be there at, probably one of the most difficult moments of their lives, no matter how natural, because she's obviously old, she's probably dying of natural causes, so it's the course of nature, but still, nevertheless, it's probably one of the most painful moments for many of those people. So I'm just curious, how do you go about that?
Yeah.
In this particular case, if you can share that with us.
Yeah. So we had visited this family. So this is in the year 2000, and so this image was made in October of 2000. But in July, a few months earlier, we had gone and spent a couple of weeks with them. And I was with Julie. We brought our two kids at that point, who were small, and so we had gotten to know this family. They had received us and welcomed us, and so then I decided I wanted to go back that October, because there was going to be a family reunion, and I thought it would be a beautiful, it would provide a beautiful situation to make more images to tell this story, while Maxine, who's suffering from end stages of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, is bedridden and really can't do anything for herself. Anyway, and so I was living in the farmhouse basically with the two men on the right, Arden, her husband, Warren, this 76-year-old man who had moved in to care for them, which was another beautiful thing, and then Maxine. And we were waking up every morning, and like the three guys, we were like acting like silly teenagers. Actually, it was very cute how we were behaving. Well, it was a Wednesday morning, and we woke up, we went into Maxine's room, and it was just very clear to us that this was the day. Like, she's so strong and so tough, she wouldn't let go, but this was the day. But Arden, her husband, had to go in and tell her that, give her permission basically to let go. And what was so unbelievable about that day is they came to me, not the hospice nurse, not her husband, not Warren, the friend, but to me, to go to Arden to tell him to go into the room, to give her permission to let go. So I got on my knees and I sidled up to Arden and I just said to him, "Hey man, I think, and meanwhile I'm like thinking, who the hell am I? How did I get in this situation? I'm just a documentary photographer. But this is what happens, folks. This is what happens. And we have to be able to seize these moments and understand how our role shifts, sometimes quite dramatically, sometimes just incrementally, that it is not okay to be the fly on the wall at this point, that we are being given part of the privilege of access is we are given responsibility. And so I went to Arden, as I said, and I explained to him it would really be good if you went in to Maxine's room and told her that it's okay to let go. And he got up and he shuffled into her room. He's 90 years old, right? And he comes out maybe 15 minutes later, and then 1 hour later is this scene with her passing. So wow, for me, it was just one of the most powerful moments I've ever experienced as a human, let alone as a documentarian. And then this was the moment she passed. And then what was really additionally kind of challenging, moving for me, was after the body was taken away and the hospital bed was taken away, and he sleeps right next to her in this other bed. He asked me that night to sleep in the bed next to him. I mean, talk about being entrusted, huh?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like my heart could burst with this sort of, how much that meant to me. And so the whole night I couldn't sleep because all I could think of was Maxine's spirit was coming into the room going like, who the hell are you sleeping with my husband? But anyway, so that was this scene. Yeah.
So I have a few more questions. So you mentioned you made a film. People are asking if they can see the film somewhere, and can they see it somewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So and it's Julie who made the film. I mean, obviously I took part in it, but it's her film. She directed it, she produced it, and edited it. But you can certainly if you go to the Talking Eyes Media website, which is all spelled out, talkingeyesmedia.org, you can look at that. And there's a couple of films. There's a shorter film we did called Friends for Life, which was specifically about these two gentlemen, Warren and Arden. And that initially appeared on Media Storm. And we did a lot of work with Brian Storm and Media Storm at the, we had the good fortune to sort of meet him and become very close friends and collaborators with him while we were doing this project. And actually it was when he was at MSNBC at that point, Brian, who created, award-winning websites, especially at that time when websites weren't as sophisticated as they are now. He was really ahead of the game. So anyway, but you can go to talkingeyesmedia.org and there'll be Aging in America films there. Yeah.
Let me just share this. talkingeyesmedia.org. I'm just going to share it here. Just give me a second. Okay. And one more thing, you often work with Julie, your wife, right? That's not the only project you've done. You've done quite a few. I'm just curious, how does that affect, the day-to-day dynamics of of a couple life? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Sorry if it's too personal, but I'm just curious
No.
how. It's obviously an amazing opportunity to travel with your better half and so on. But I'm just curious, how does that work out? Especially because you worked on different projects and produced various body of works. So I'm just curious about that.
Well, it's overall it's amazing. We're very blessed that we get on well when we work together. That isn't to say it's all perfect. I mean, there's no question we get very frustrated at times with each other. I tend to want to move faster and be, like, why didn't we do this yet? And Julia's more kind of slow and steady, but also, pays attention to detail. And as I like to say, Julia is someone you can always rely on being the last eyes on something. If you give her a document to read or a film to watch, whatever, a set of pictures, if she says it's okay, you can go and publish it. There isn't going to be some typo or some error or whatever. So but we it's a yin and yang thing. We work well together in that way. I mean, what's interesting for us now, because we've been together for almost 30 years, is that we've gone from being early in our careers where we could travel, go to the West Bank or go to Egypt or wherever to work on projects together. Then we had kids, and then that for the most part sidelined Julie. I mean, truthfully, and in the child rearing years. And now that our children are grown up and gone, so now we can go back to working together in the field. And so, and our latest project was Time published in January, looking at the elections in Georgia. So it was really our first time out of the gate post kids, where we were able to go out in the field together, not have to juggle, long distance child care and all the stresses that go in with that, and just work freely. So I'm hoping we've now entered like a new phase of our lives where we can work together even more. And most importantly, that Julie can travel, and because Julie is such an amazing mom that while she gave me permission and her blessings for me to travel, I was gone most of their lives. That anyway, now we can work together, and she can travel as well. And so we'll see where that takes us.
I think we still have time for you to guide us through the few remaining frames, right?
Yeah. Well, we're going till 11 or 11:30.
Well, we can go as much, but we
Okay.
still have about 10-15 minutes easily.
Okay, cool. So actually, one of the first stories that we worked on, and in terms of the structure of our approach to this project, it was very much like taken in an episodic approach, where we figured, and this was at a time where print media was still so vibrant, so I could sell idea, like I could go out in the world. And so this story about aging prisoners in America, this was one of the first stories that we did. I went to Texas and Alabama looking at dedicated geriatric facilities within prisons. And then we produced this work, and then the New York Times Magazine published it. So it was a tremendous start for the project to have our first body of work in such an important publication. And but this was a time, as I was saying, where you could create sort of smaller stories that you could publish along the way in different magazines all over the world, I would say, because this was also a period like being in Seven, where I had relationships with like 10 sub-agents around the world in different countries, and we would distribute the work. So this was a way to not only to produce and sustain the project over a long period of time. So it was a story in Spencer, South Dakota, after a tornado had come through. That was Main Street. 9 people died. They were all elderly. So we used this as an opportunity to look at the graying of rural America, and then caregiving. So we were producing all kinds of stories. Sometimes it was just in a day. Sometimes, like in the case of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, I think I went 4 or 5 times over a period of months. We'd calibrate how much work needed to be done to complete each segment, if you like, or each episode of this project. Here's another example of reinvention. This is in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, in a retirement community that also had a child care, like a creche for kids in the community. And every day they would bring the children up to the Alzheimer's unit. That's what this picture is, so that both groups of people could interact with each other. Then foster care. This is another story I did for the New York Times Magazine. This idea that now there were these pilot programs in I think 26 states in America where elderly folks were being essentially adopted as, instead of foster kids, it was like foster seniors. And this was a unique story. We did this in right outside of Philadelphia. Um, anyway, there were so many different strands. This is another. I photographed 4 death scenes in the course of this project. This is one of them. This was in San Francisco in a hospice unit, and this is Virginia and her husband, and they're another folks. There are other folks who really let us in quite deeply. This is the moment where the coroner comes to take his body away. And then Virginia somehow survived and continued to go to dancing lessons. Also looked in Chinatown in San Francisco, where there was a lot of innovative programs by this organization called Onlock, ONLOK. And they were one of the original organizations that kind of came up with this idea of how to create, semi-independent living for our elders. And it's similar to the VA program I mentioned earlier, where by integrating community support, family support, and then the support of professional healthcare providers, someone like Ike, who was 100 years old in this picture, could live in a single room occupancy hotel in San Francisco alone, because he knew that in the morning, a nurse would come to get him up, bathe him, give him his pills, feed him, and then a family member would come in the middle of the day, and then another nurse would come at the end of the day. So this might sound like a lot, but again, if we are going to fray our families and our communities to the point where it leaves our elders not only alone but helpless, really, with no support, then we have to reinvent our society to come up with these support programs, because we cannot stop caring for our elders. This was a couple in their 80s in Florida getting married. So what we were trying to do, and I give Julie a lot of credit in this, she realized after a few years of working on this, we couldn't just dwell on stories about decay, death, disease. Otherwise, who would want to look at it, right? So we need to mix it with stories that were positive and hopeful, and showed the beauty of and the opportunities that we have now of growing old. So this is an RV, recreational vehicle club. This is the other thing. America is full of subcultures, and so there's this RV club called Loners of America, and in the charter, it basically says you can be a part of this group unless you show signs of coupling. Oh my God, what a weird world. So these folks would, like, every month they would meet somewhere in America at a campsite, and they'd pull in with their RVs, and then they would have these powwows, these campouts. So, yet another way that we're reinventing ourselves. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Ed. There's a lot of questions, but let me just say to people that there are some few copies left that Ed still has. So we share the link if you wish to purchase a copy. It's in the chat room, and there's a, I think, very valid question, and important in this age where we are questioning consent to photographers as photographers and so on. So Suzanne Friedel, I'm sorry. She's asking, how did you make sure that Maxine agreed with being photographed on the moment of dying? I understood she had Parkinson's and was also suffering from dementia. So how could she agree consciously?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and there's not an easy answer, but I mean, I certainly had permission of, her husband, her caregivers, the hospice organization that was sending the nurses to care for her. her family members, her kids, everyone who was around. And Maxine, while she could, barely move and just sort of maybe do slight facial, occasionally she would smile, it was clear she knew I was there. And we didn't sense any protestation. But having said all that, I totally understand the spirit of your question, and it's something that it's a part of our the conversation in our profession now that I will tell you 30, 40 years ago when I was getting started did not exist. And I welcome this conversation because it's critically important for us to have, what we are calling now is informed consent, that it's not enough anymore just to get the consent of someone, that we need to be sure that they understand the implications of what they are consenting to. Now, in the case of Maxine, or another example, which is much more dramatic in a way, is, let's say you're photographing a COVID patient in a hospital now, maybe, or you're going on an emergency run with healthcare, with EMS workers, and all of a sudden you have someone who is incapacitated in some way. There's no way, and why would you even think about asking them in that moment? Because that's the last thing that they should be concerning themselves with, is some photographer or filmmaker wanting permission. But how do you navigate these situations? And it's tough. It's really tough, until I have permission in a situation like that. If the caregivers will even allow me to film, I'll make sure to hide the identity of the person as best as I can. So, there is no perfect answer to your very important and correct question. It's more about, how do we humanely and responsibly and respectfully carry out our work in a way that hopefully does not take advantage of people, render them in a compromised situation that they might look back at and be like, why the hell did you do that? There is no perfect resolute answer to that. It's just, we can do the best we can and hopefully not hurt anyone.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you everyone for being with us. Thank you, Ed, for your time and this exhaustive report on this amazing body of work. And I honestly think it's as important as it, and relevant as it ever was, given the pandemic and what's happening to the older population. So I would just like to use this opportunity to briefly remind you about a few other things that we have coming up, people. So there is a great talk on February 11th, which is about the critical role of a photo agency in a professional life of contemporary photographer. And I think it's, for whoever is in photography, is definitely a must-see conversation. And well, both Ed and I have been with various agencies through our career, and the change and the role of photographic agency has drastically changed. But it's the talk hosted by people who know a lot about it, and it's going to be talk with Marcel Saba, and a legendary agent, and our own Ron Haviv and Maggie Stieber. So everyone, if you have time, please join for that. And then the next one is it's a talk with our, I think, youngest photographer at 7 Photo Agency, a Russian photographer, Mary Gelman. She's going to talk about absolutely gorgeous project called Svetlana. And it's one of the most beautiful sets of pictures I've seen in a long time. So make sure to check in on that one. And that one is coming up on February 14th. So again, everyone, thank you very much for joining us. Stay healthy. Ed, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Brilliant as always. And everyone, stay safe. Bye.